She was 21 and homeless. No family of her own, no savings, just a canvas bag and $10 she had earned picking apples at an orchard above Seneca Lake. And with that $10, she bought an abandoned seed vault on a hillside in the Finger Lakes of upstate New York in a stretch of Schuyler County that had not seen a working germination test since the vault had closed in 1989. The stone walls were buried in the hill. The iron door had rusted half shut. But what nobody knew was that hidden in the cold chamber of that old vault was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Nola Veith had grown up with the seeds in her hands, not the packets from a garden center, the real seeds, the ones a person saves by hand from a ripe fruit at the end of the season. Ferments in a jar of water for 3 days to strip the gel coating, rinses clean, dries on a screen in the shade for a week, and stores in a glass jar with a tight lid and a silica packet to keep the moisture below 8%. Her grandmother had taught her to save seeds the way certain grandmothers in certain farming counties teach a child the one thing the farms depend on. By putting the seed in her hand and saying, "This is next year. If you lose this, you lose next year." Her grandmother's name was Ilse Veith, and she had been a seed keeper, a woman who maintained a community seed library for the farms and gardens of Schuyler County, New York for 37 years. Ilse had not been a farmer. Ilse had been the person the farmers came to when they needed seed, not commercial hybrid seed from a catalog, but the old open-pollinated varieties, the heirloom crops that the families of the Finger Lakes had been growing for 100 years and that had been bred generation by generation for the specific soil and climate and growing season of the Lake Country Hills. Varieties with names like Seneca, Chief Sweet Corn, and Montour Tomato, and Schuyler County Pole Bean, names that existed nowhere in any commercial seed catalog because the varieties had never been commercialized. They had been passed from farmer to farmer, hand to hand, jar to jar across decades. And Ilse had been the jar. Ilse had been born in 1935 on a farm above Watkins Glen, the daughter of a man named Gerhard Veith. The family name had come from a village in Saxony who had farmed 60 acres of Lake Country hillside growing vegetables for the Watkins Glen market and for a small roadside stand on Route 14. Gerhard had been a seed saver by necessity. In the 1930s, the commercial seed industry had not yet reached the small farms of the Finger Lakes, and the farmers had grown their crops from seed they saved themselves. Selecting the best fruit from each season, extracting the seed, drying it, storing it in glass jars in the root cellar, and planting it the following spring. The practice was not nostalgic. The practice was economic. Seed saved from your own crop was free. Seed bought from a catalog cost money. And a farmer in the Finger Lakes in the 1930s did not have money for seed. Gerhard had saved seed from every crop he grew: tomatoes, beans, corn, squash, peppers, cucumbers, melons, lettuce. He had labeled each jar with the variety name, the year, and a one-line note on the crop's performance. Montour Tomato, 1938, heavy producer, good blight resistance, save again. Schuyler Pole Bean, 1939, strong climber, tender pod, best year yet. The jars had accumulated in the root cellar across 20 years, and by the time Gerhard died in 1958, the cellar held over 60 varieties of vegetable seed, each one adapted to the soil and climate of the Finger Lakes across decades of selection. Ilse had inherited the jars and the practice. She had continued saving seed on the farm after Gerhard's death, and she had expanded the collection by trading seed with other farmers in the county, a practice that had been common in the Finger Lakes for 100 years, and that was already by the 1960s beginning to disappear as the commercial seed companies expanded their reach into the small farm counties and the farmers began buying hybrid seed instead of saving their own. Ilse had watched this transition with the specific alarm of a person who understood what was being lost. A hybrid seed could not be saved. A hybrid planted from its own seed did not grow true, did not produce the same fruit, reverted to its parent varieties, or worse. A farmer who switched from saved seed to hybrid seed was a farmer who had given up his independence, who had become dependent on the seed company for next year's crop. the way a person who stops cooking becomes dependent on the restaurant. Ilse had decided in 1964 to formalize the seed saving. She had converted Gerhard's root cellar into a seed vault, insulating the stone walls with straw bales, installing a set of wooden shelves, and labeling each jar with a numbered tag that corresponded to an entry in a master seed catalog she had begun keeping in a leather-bound ledger. The catalog recorded for each variety the name, the source, the year of first collection, the viability test results from each season, and a one-line description of the variety's characteristics. The viability test was the critical entry. Every spring, Ilse had taken 10 seeds from each jar, wrapped them in a damp paper towel, placed the towel in a sealed bag, and waited 7 days. The number of seeds that germinated out of 10 was the viability rate. A viability rate of 8 or higher meant the seed was strong. A rate of 5 to 7 meant the seed was declining and needed to be grown out and resaved from fresh fruit. A rate below 5 meant the seed was dying and needed to be grown out immediately, or the variety would be lost. Ilse had maintained this practice for 37 years, from 1964 until 2001, and she had saved the farms of Schuyler County more times than the farms knew. When the blight of 1979 had wiped out every commercial tomato variety in the county, Ilse had supplied Montour tomato seed to 14 farms, a variety that had been bred over decades in the Finger Lakes for blight resistance, and that had survived the outbreak untouched while the commercial hybrids had rotted in the field. When the corn borer infestation of 1988 had devastated the hybrid sweet corn, Ilse had supplied Seneca Chief seed, an open-pollinated variety with a thicker husk that the borers could not penetrate. The farmers had not thanked Ilse for saving their seasons. The farmers had not known in most cases that Ilse had saved their seasons. They had simply come to the farm as they had always come and had said, "Ilse, I need tomato seed." And Ilse had given them a jar, and the jar had contained next year. Ilse had also known about the old Pratt seed vault. Half a mile up the hill road from the farm, built into the limestone hillside above Seneca Lake, was a stone chamber that had been constructed in 1911 by a man named Cornelius Pratt, who had been the county agricultural agent for Schuyler County from 1905 until his retirement in 1948. Cornelius had built the vault as a community seed storage facility, a naturally cool, dry, dark chamber where the farmers of the county could store their saved seed under controlled conditions rather than in the variable temperatures of their own root cellars. The vault had been the county's seed bank for 43 years. Cornelius had maintained it, tested the seed, and distributed it to the farms. Cornelius Pratt understood something the seed companies didn't. Ilse told Nola once on a summer evening when Nola was 10 and they were testing seed viability. At the kitchen table, he understood that a seed is not a product. A seed is a relationship. The seed and the soil have been talking to each other for 100 years. The seed knows the soil. The soil knows the seed. When you plant a Montour tomato in Schuyler County soil, the seed already knows the pH and the drainage and the frost date and the length of the summer. A commercial hybrid doesn't know any of that. A commercial hybrid is a stranger in the soil. That's why the heirloom outperforms the hybrid in the crisis year, and because the heirloom has been here before. Ilse had married a man named Fritz Veith, a cousin, a carpenter who had maintained the barns and outbuildings of the Finger Lakes farms for 25 years, and who had understood that a wife who kept 200 glass jars of seed on the shelves of a root cellar was a wife whose work was preservation, and that preservation was not a hobby, but a duty. Fritz had died in 2004. Ilse had continued alone. Ilse and Fritz had had one daughter, a woman named Margit, who was Nola's mother. Margit had left Schuyler County at 19, had moved to Ithaca, had worked as a hotel housekeeper, had had Nola with a man who had stayed for 6 months, and had died of an overdose in a motel room in Elmira when Nola was 4. Nola had been placed in foster care, a family named the Barlows in Watkins Glen, a retired couple who had fostered 11 children across 20 years, and who had taken Nola in because the Barlows took in everyone, and because Nola was small and quiet and did not take up much room. The Barlows had been adequate. They had been kind in the way that people who have fostered 11 children are kind, evenly, reliably, without the specific, focused intensity that a single child needs. Nola had learned, in the Barlow house, how to be grateful for enough without confusing enough with everything. The fixed point had been Ilsa. Every weekend, from the age of 5, the Barlows had driven Nola to the farm above Watkins Glen, and Nola had spent the day with Ilsa in the root cellar, in the garden, in the kitchen, learning the seeds. Ilsa had taught Nola to test viability at 5. She had taken a jar of Seneca Chief sweet corn from the shelf, counted out 10 kernels, laid them on a damp paper towel, folded the towel into a square, sealed it in a plastic bag, and set it on the kitchen counter. 7 days, Ilsa said. In 7 days, we open the towel and count the sprouts. If 8 or more have sprouted, the seed is alive. If 5 have sprouted, the seed is tired. If fewer than 5 have sprouted, the seed is dying, and we need to grow it out this summer and save fresh seed from the new crop, or the variety is gone. 7 days later, Nola had opened the towel. 9 of the 10 kernels had sprouted. Small white root tips emerging from the seed coats, curling against the damp paper. 9 out of 10, Ilsa said. That's a strong variety. That corn has been alive in this jar for 3 years, and it's still 90% viable. That's the seed telling you it wants to be planted. By 7, Nola could run the viability test on any seed in the vault: corn, bean, tomato, squash, pepper, cucumber. She could count the sprouts, calculate the percentage, and record the result in the catalog. By 9, Ilsa had taught her to save seed, the full process from fruit selection to fermentation, to rinsing, to drying, to storage, each step specific to the crop. Tomato seeds were fermented. Bean seeds were dried in the pod. Corn was dried on the ear. Squash seeds were scooped, rinsed, and air-dried. Each crop had its own method, and the method was not flexible. A tomato seed that was not fermented retained its gel coating, and the gel coating inhibited germination, and the viability dropped from 90% to 50%, and the variety weakened. The method is the variety, Ilsa said. If you save the seed wrong, you haven't saved the seed, you've saved a dead thing in a jar. By 12, Nola could identify 50 heirloom varieties by seed shape alone, without seeing the label on the jar. She could pick up a seed and tell Ilsa whether it was a Montour tomato, or a Trumansburg paste, or a Hector cherry, or an Odessa plum by the size, the color, the shape of the seed coat, and the weight of it in her palm. Ilsa had tested her the same way, blindfolded, 1 seed at a time, and Nola had gotten 47 out of 50 correct. You have Gerhard's eye, Ilsa said. Your great-grandfather could sort a bushel of tomatoes by variety without looking at the label. Ilsa had died when Nola was 17, a quiet death at home on the farm, on a Sunday morning in September, harvest season, the tomatoes ripe on the vine, the beans drying in the pods, the corn browning on the stalks. She had been sitting at the kitchen table with a jar of Seneca Chief corn in her lap and the seed catalog open to the last page, making her final viability entry. The last entry read, Seneca Chief, September 2017, 10 out of 10 viable. Strong. Save. She had been 82. She had saved seed for 59 years, 22 years on her own before, formalizing the library, and 37 years of the formal catalog. She had maintained over 200 varieties. She had never lost one. Nola had taken Ilsa's brass hand lens, a small folding magnifier Ilsa had used for inspecting seed coats, and a jar of Montour tomato seed from the last save. The Barlows had not wanted any of Ilsa's equipment. The farm had been sold within 6 months. After Ilsa's death, the Barlows' biological daughter, a woman named Christine, who had been living in Syracuse, had come home. The Barlows' house had 3 bedrooms, and Christine had needed one, and Nola had been the one asked to leave. The Barlows had been apologetic. Nola had understood. She had been understanding things like this since she was 4. She had gotten a job at an apple orchard above Seneca Lake, picking fruit in the fall, pruning in the winter, $12 an hour, with a bunkhouse room that was available September through April. She had walked past the old Pratt seed vault every morning on the hill road to the orchard, a stone doorway set into the hillside, half hidden by sumac and wild grape. The iron door rusted and the stone lintel cracked, but the chamber behind it still dry, still cool, still dark, because a vault built into limestone does not change. If you're enjoying this story, take a second and subscribe. It helps us keep making stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, have you ever held a seed in your hand and understood that what you were holding was not a thing, but a future? She had $10 in her pocket and no car. She had Ilse's brass hand lens and the jar of Montour tomato seed in her bag. She did not need a listing or bulletin board or a conversation overheard in a store. She had been walking past the building every morning for 3 years. She knew it was empty. She knew it was stone. She knew the chamber was dry because Ilse had told her Cornelius had built it into the limestone, and limestone is naturally cool and naturally dry. And a seed stored cool and dry will outlast a seed stored anywhere else. She walked to the Schuyler County Clerk's office in Watkins Glen the next morning. The clerk, a woman in her 50s named Mrs. Herrick, pulled up the listing and said, "The Pratt Seed Vault on the Hill Road above Seneca Lake. Stone chamber, about 400 square feet built into the hillside on a 0.3-acre parcel. Surplus since 2007. $10. She looked at Nola. That building was the county seed bank for 43 years. Cornelius Pratt built it in 1911. Nola said, "My grandmother used to tell me about it." Mrs. Herrick said, "Ilse Veith was your grandmother?" Nola said, "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Herrick stamped the deed and handed her an iron key on a loop of cotton cord. "Ilse supplied my mother's garden with tomato seed for 20 years. My mother grew Montour tomatoes from Ilse's seed until the day she died. She said they were the best tomatoes in the county because they had been growing in this county longer than anyone could remember." She walked the hill road to the vault. That afternoon, it stood in the hillside exactly as she had seen it every morning. A stone doorway, an iron door, a lintel carved with the year 1911. She put the key in the lock. The lock was stiff, but it turned. The chamber was one room, stone walls, a flagstone floor, a vaulted stone ceiling, maybe 20 feet deep and 15 feet wide, carved into the limestone hillside. The temperature inside was cool and constant, about 55 degrees. The natural temperature of the earth at that depth, the same temperature year-round, regardless of the weather outside. Along the walls, heavy wooden shelves. Most of the shelves were empty, but on the back wall, on the lowest shelf, sat a wooden crate with iron corner brackets, sealed with a fitted lid and a heavy brass hasp. Nola opened the hasp and lifted the lid. Inside, 48 glass mason jars, each one sealed with a wax-dipped lid, each one labeled in a careful hand with a variety name, a collection date, and a source note. Montour tomato, 1948, Pratt Farm. Seneca Chief corn, 1945, Veith Farm. Schuyler pole bean, 1942, Herrick Farm. Reading plum tomato, 1950, Thayer Farm. 48 varieties of heritage vegetable seed, tomato, bean, corn, squash, pepper, cucumber, melon, lettuce. Each one collected between 1940 and 1952. Each one sealed and stored in the cold chamber for over 70 years. Some of the variety names Nola recognized from Ilse's catalog. Some she did not. Varieties that had been lost even from Ilse's collection. Varieties that existed nowhere else. Beside the crate, a heavy canvas pouch. And beneath both, a thick leather-bound book. The canvas pouch held gold coins. 34 Liberty Quarter Eagles dated between 1911 and 1948. The coin dealer in Ithaca valued them at approximately $21,000. The book was Cornelius Pratt's master seed catalog. Page after page of handwritten entries for every variety he had collected and stored in the vault across 43 years. Each entry recorded the variety name, the source farm, the year of collection, the viability test results from each annual test, and a one-line description. Montour tomato. Red, medium, determinate, strong blight resistance. 200-plus years in county. Source, Pratt Farm. Originally from Veith Farm, circa 1870. The catalog traced the genealogy of each variety back through the farms, sometimes across 5 or 6 generations of farmers. Each one selecting the best fruit and saving the seed and passing it to the next. Tucked inside the front cover was a folded letter. To whoever opens this vault. My name is Cornelius Pratt. I have kept the seeds of this county from 1905 until today. The 12th of October, 1948. I am retiring. The county will not fund the vault after I leave. I am sealing 48 varieties in the cold chamber because the chamber is 55 degrees year-round. And a seed stored at 55 degrees in the dark will remain viable for decades. Some of these varieties exist nowhere else. The catalog shows what they are and where they came from. The gold is what I saved. Use it for the vault. Test the seeds. Grow what sprouts. Cornelius Pratt, Seed Keeper. October 12th, 1948. Nola read the letter twice. Then, 1948. Nola read the letter twice. Then she opened the seed catalog to the last entry. Watkins Glen Cherry Tomato, October 1948. Source, Pratt Garden. Viability, 10 out of 10. Last variety collected. Small, sweet, prolific. My wife's favorite. She held the page open and read the entry. The variety name, the date, the viability, the final note. And she did not cry, and she did not speak. She simply read the words and understood that the man who had written this entry had known, as he sealed the crate, that the tomato his wife loved might not exist anywhere else after this jar, and that the jar was the last chance. She said quietly to the vault and the stone walls and the shelves, "Thank you, Mr. Pratt. I will test the seeds." The next morning, she walked to Watkins Glen and deposited the coin dealer's check at the bank on Franklin Street. She opened a checking account and walked out into the October wind. The following week, she bought a used truck, a 2001 Ford Ranger with 182,000 miles and a cracked side mirror, from a retired orchard worker in Burdett for $1,700. The first month was the shelves and the floor. The wooden shelves had warped from 70 years of contact with the damp stone walls, and the flagstone floor had developed a mineral film from the limestone groundwater seeping through the joints. Nola pulled each shelf from the wall, dried it in the October sun on the hillside above the vault, planed it flat, and reinstalled it with fresh cedar shims to keep the wood away from the stone. She scrubbed the flagstone floor with a wire brush and vinegar, clearing the mineral film until the stone was clean and dry. Mrs. Herrick from the clerk's office drove up the hill road one Saturday morning with a bucket of hydraulic cement her husband had left over from a basement repair and helped Nola seal the floor joints against seepage. Cornelius Pratt built this vault into solid limestone, Mrs. Herrick said, pressing cement into the joints. Limestone is nature's refrigerator. 55 degrees year-round, no electricity. He built the best seed vault in the state, and he built it with a chisel and a wheelbarrow. She made the vault's small anteroom, the stone-walled entry chamber about 8 feet by 6, where Cornelius had kept his work table, livable in pieces. She bought a folding army cot from the thrift store in Watkins Glen for $10 and set it against the south wall near the iron door, so she could lie in the dark and look out at Seneca Lake through the doorway. She found a small cast iron box stove at a farm auction in Odessa for $25. And a man named Mr. Kowalski from the orchard where she had worked drove up the hill road with a length of stovepipe and helped her run it through a vent hole she chiseled in the stone wall above the door. Your grandmother gave my wife bean seed every spring for 15 years. Mr. Kowalski said, fitting the pipe. Schuyler County pole beans. My wife grew them up the back fence. Best beans I ever ate. We lost the seed when your grandmother died. Nobody else had it. Nola said, I have it. She opened her canvas bag and handed him a jar of Schuyler County pole bean from Ilse's last save. Mr. Kowalski held the jar up to the light and looked at the beans inside and said nothing for a long time. The first fire she lit in the box stove, dry ash splits from a windfall on the hillside, filled the anteroom with a warmth that stopped at the threshold of the cold chamber because the cold chamber held its own temperature and the heat from the stove could not reach it. And this was correct because the cold chamber needed to stay cold and the anteroom needed to be warm. And the vault was built so that the two temperatures existed side by side, separated by a stone archway, the way Cornelius had designed it. Nola sat on the cot and watched the firelight play across the stone walls and the iron door and the view of Seneca Lake through the doorway. The lake dark blue in the October evening. The hills on the far shore already turning gold. And she thought, Cornelia sat here, at this table, looking at this lake, testing the seeds every spring and writing the results in the catalog and knowing that the jars on the shelves behind him held next year for every farm in the county. She set Ilsa's photograph on a stone shelf beside the cot. Ilsa at the kitchen table in 1996, hand lens in one hand, a jar of tomato seed in the other, the seed catalog open before her. She placed the 48 jars on the vault shelves in the order Cornelius had numbered them in the catalog. Each one labeled, each one sealed. A spectrum of heritage varieties from Montour tomato to Watkins Glen cherry, arranged chronologically from 1940 to 1952. She set Ilsa's brass hand lens and the jar of Montour tomato on the work table. And she hung the seed catalog from an iron nail on the stone wall above the table, open to the first entry. Montour tomato, 1940. Pratt Farm. Viability, 10 out of 10. She tested the seeds the following spring. She took 10 seeds from each of the 48 jars, 480 seeds in total, and ran the viability tests the way Ilsa had taught her. Damp paper towel, sealed bag, kitchen counter, 7 days. The results stunned her. 31 of the 48 varieties had viable seed. 65% viability after more than 70 years in the cold chamber. The Montour tomato, 7 out of 10. The Seneca Chief corn, 8 out of 10. The Schuyler pole bean, 9 out of 10. Cornelius had been right. A seed stored at 55 degrees in the dark would remain viable for decades. He had not guessed. He had known. She got a job in her second year. A Heritage Seed Company in Ithaca, one of the Clear's Throat, small operations that were reviving heirloom varieties for the growing market of gardeners and small farmers who wanted open-pollinated seed adapted to the Northeast, hired her as a part-time seed curator because the owner, a woman named Dr. Vasquez, had heard from Mrs. Herrick that a young woman on the hill road above Seneca Lake had germinated 70-year-old seed from the Pratt vault and was growing heritage varieties that had been considered extinct. Dr. Vasquez had driven to the vault and had stood in the cold chamber looking at the 48 jars on the shelves and had said, "Some of these varieties aren't in any seed bank in the country. The Watkins Glen cherry tomato has been listed as extinct since 1965. Nola said, "It's in jar number 48. 7 out of 10 viable." Dr. Vasquez said, "You just brought a tomato back from the dead." She hired Nola that afternoon. Word spread through the Finger Lakes farming community. A small farm in Hector drove over with a list of heirloom varieties their grandmother had grown in the 1950s and asked whether any of them were in the vault. 3 were. A garden club in Trumansburg ordered starts of 6 heritage varieties for a community garden. A seed library in Ithaca asked Nola to teach a workshop on viability testing. And 12 people sat at folding tables in a church basement and learned to count sprouts on damp paper towels the way Ilsa had taught Nola on the kitchen counter. A food writer from Ithaca drove to the vault and wrote about it in a regional magazine, calling it the most important seed collection in the Finger Lakes, hidden in a hillside for 76 years. On a clear evening in late September of her 24th year, Nola sat on the stone lintel of the vault door and watched the last copper light fade across Seneca Lake. The lake turned from blue to gold to dark copper. The far hills already shadow. Below her, the hill dropped steeply to the lake road. And beyond the road, the vineyards and orchards of a lake shore stretched south toward Watkins Glen. Inside the vault, the cold chamber held its 55 degrees. The 48 jars stood on their shelves. And the seeds inside them, some of them 76 years old, were alive. She thought about Cornelius, who had chiseled a chamber into a limestone hillside in 1911 because he had understood that the earth was the best refrigerator and that a seed stored inside the earth would outlast a seed stored anywhere else. She thought about Gerhard, who had saved seed from every crop he grew because seed was next year, and next year was not something you bought from a catalog. And she thought about Ilsa, who had maintained 200 varieties for 37 years and had never lost one. Because Ilsa had understood what Cornelius had understood. That a seed is not a product. A seed is a relationship between the plant and the place. And the relationship is what you are saving. That's the thing about the seeds our grandmothers teach us to keep. We do not always know when we are 5 years old and counting sprouts on a damp paper towel in the kitchen that the counting is itself the trade. We learn it slowly, summer by summer, jar by jar. And then, for years after the old woman dies, we open a crate in a stone chamber and find 48 jars of seed that have been waiting in the dark for 70 years, and we understand what she had been teaching us. She had been teaching us that a seed stored cool and dry will outlast everything. She had been teaching us that next year is inside the jar. Nola Veith was 21 years old and homeless. She had $10 to her name, and she spent it on an abandoned seed vault on a hillside in the Finger Lakes of upstate New York. It was the best $10 she ever spent. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you loved it, we have something special for you. 12 brand new stories never released on YouTube. Only available to the people who support this channel directly. Each one a full Quiet Road story just like this one. There's also a full audiobook available for the people who want to listen to all 12 in one place. You will find the link in the bio. We poured our whole hearts into these, and we made them for the people who truly listen. Thank you for being one of them. See you on the next Quiet Road.